Dario Amodei from Anthropic was one of the leaders to also speak out against what's happening right now in Minnesota. Um, he also, it was part of a larger essay that he wrote. It was, I think it was 20,000 words on the current state of
30
AI.
pages. I needed Claude to get me through it, Akash.
Right. Isn't that kind of ironic that we use his product to digest his own words? Although maybe that's why he made it in the first place. What you know, what do you make of a 30-page essay, and the key takeaways from that? I mean, it's hard to get too tough through something like this even. What did you think?
Yeah, well, look, on one hand, I admire Dario for being outspoken about the implications he sees about AI. He's always done this. He's a man of essays. Apparently, he wrote this in 3 days over the December break. And I guess as a writer and someone who also finds Dario to be really thoughtful, I kind of like welcome these. I'm interested in reading them. I think they're sort of net positive. But they're really principles, Akash, and not a playbook for solving all of the problems that he outlines, which, by the way, are really scary. I mean, at one point, he talks about the fact that we have trained AI on science fiction. Does that mean that the AI is going to adopt the mentalities of all the sort of worst AIs of science fiction, right? I mean, he's putting that as one of many hypotheticals to make his point. And it's sort of intentional fear mongering, right? Like Dario does want to light a fire around what he sees as a major inaction and regulation, but even his points at the end of what to do about it, to me, fall short. They're talking about constitutional government. I mean, the idea of getting Elon Musk, with what we've seen over at Grok in recent weeks, to like adopt some constitution with these other AI companies just does not seem plausible to me. So in the end of the day, I'm glad this essay is out there. It's thought-provoking. People should read it. The bigger question is, what is going to happen to mitigate some of these risks? What is the will in Washington around that? One of my takeaways from Davos was actually a very split opinion on what's coming for the next wave of tech regulation. On one hand, you saw, a lot of murmurs that there seems to be, especially around AI, a lot of concern, a lot of political concern. And on the other hand, the notion that anyone was going to take a sort of aggressive regulatory stance right now, made other people laugh. So that's where my brain goes on this topic. But the essay is certainly worth a read.
Well, and so let's talk about then an essay that you wrote yourself, which was, as you just sort of alluded to, you went back and looked at your own reporting notes that you took at Davos, and Claude Cowork is the tool, the toy of the day that everyone just can't get enough of. And the premise of your essay, I'll let you tell everyone, but you basically use Claude Cowork to see if it can make sense of your reporting notes from the trip. And the results were decidedly mixed. Tell us about your process and what you learned from all of this.
Absolutely, Akash. And, it was actually sparked by an interviewing Brett Taylor, the CEO of Sierra, who we've had on the show and is sort of an AI native customer service company. And he was saying, look, I'm an engineer by trade, and I am most vulnerable to AI disruption. And this is sort of what I'm doing about it. And he went on and sort of described how he's this orchestra of these AI tools. So, kind of very bleary-eyed at the end of this trip, and in my way, you had an hour or so in the lounge before. I said, okay, let me, inspired by Brett, I'm a reporter. Some people think I'm also deeply vulnerable to disruption. Obviously, information is, and how that's transferred. I'm going to embrace Cowork. Finally had time to download it and such. And I had recorded all of my on-the-record interviews, put the transcripts in, give me the takeaways. And, on one hand, it was accurate, right? I mean, like the takeaway, minus one number that it got out of context, it was accurate, And Claude identified and made a PowerPoint presentation, big themes like the AI transformation is just beginning. Business adoption of AI is a focus of, topic of conversation, right? And it was
a little bit vanilla, in other words.
A little bit vanilla, but what it did for me, and I think I think this is important, right? I think everyone, we're all professionals are sitting here thinking, are these tools, where do I fit? How do I turbocharge my powers with these tools? And how do I look around corners for where I should focus given the march of these tools? And for me, my takeaway was, if you weren't following the technology sector and you weren't reading the information or any other sources, you'd probably learn something from this deck. Right. And by the way, you wouldn't be manipulated. It wasn't fake news. It wasn't slop. It was coherent. The slides looked good.
Yeah.
But what it made me realize is what I try to do and provide some unique value to a specific audience whose sort of interests I know, whose questions I know, and obviously do the interviews to get that original information before. And so it was sort of a lesson in knowing your audience, which is such a simple principle, but I think business professionals across fields should really, really embrace it as we enter this next AI age, because at the end of the day, my takeaways were much more around, which companies were changing their talking points, who executives were meeting with, and what that indicated for their strategies, what wasn't said, who wasn't there. That's based on 20 years as a technology reporter and editor, and I think will be more valuable to our audience. But it made me want to really tap into the brain of our audience even more, which I think is a great takeaway to have from where we are with these tools. And by the way, I did just sort of jot down those takeaways, and then I asked Claude Cowork to make me some nice slides. And slides are not my forte. Probably saved at least 45 minutes to half an hour, so I could go back to thinking about the next interview. So, yeah, overall, I think it was a valuable experience, and I really made me think about knowing our audience. And I think that's a lesson that's much broader than just for the media business today.
Great. Well, Jessica, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Jessica Lessin, our editor in chief and founder here at The Information.